I want to welcome you to the 13th reunion of the USS Orlick Association reunion. So welcome to the second San Diego reunion. We had our first reunion in 1995, which was a great success. We had a few more people in 1995. We had 255. And I also welcome you to the 21st year since we started these reunions. And so it's been a long time, but it's been fun. It was good to be here at all these reunions. And my name is Bob Orlick, and I happen to be here only because Lieutenant Orlick was my uncle. Not because I served aboard the USS Orlick, though I wish I had. But that's okay, because any excuse to be able to mix with such wonderful people is a good one. You have afforded me a great privilege to serve you. You have afforded me a great privilege to serve you, and you are the ones that served us aboard the USS Orlick. I am not sure what direction my life would have taken in the last 21 years of doing reunions had it not been that I was totally immersed in this, but I know for one thing that if I had not done this, I would not have so many wonderful friends. Our country has many problems, and sometimes it's hard to be proud of what we're seeing. But it's not hard to be proud of our military and the quality of the men and women who serve. I am proud to be a part of this association, and that is with a capital P. I am looking forward and hope that you are, as I am, to what the next 4 days are going to bring. Please keep your plan of the day at hand and be listening to any changes that might be brought to your attention. You have been so kind to us and allowed us to be a part of your lives, and I thank you. It is such a pleasure to see so many USS Orlick sailors, family, and friends here. I'm especially pleased to see, and I don't know where she is, my sister-in-law, Venice Orlick. Is she out there somewhere? Oh, over there. And her sister, Aurora Valdez. My brother, Don, loved the USS Orlick, and he loved attending reunions, and he's been gone now for 6 years, and we miss him greatly. And what a pleasure to see Norma Wright. Where's Norma? Hi, Norma. Norma's the widow of our friend and shipmate Harvey Wright, but Norma is a member in her own right as well, as we've grown to love and respect her as part of the Orlick family. Ron Williams and Rhonda Sullivan are with us from the USS Orlick Naval Museum. Back there. We will hear from Ron on Wednesday about our ship. What a pleasure to have Matt Mickelson, our son of USS Orlick sailor Bob Mickelson, somewhere here. Remember, he filmed he's back there filming. He filmed the Arlington Memorial Service, and we're going to be experiencing that somewhere along the way here. We'll be seeing it as we spend our time in a special setting in the San Diego Veterans Museum. It is such a pleasure to have folks from that wonderful hidden secret of a museum in Balboa Park. I haven't seen him, but I thought he was coming tonight. We were supposed to have Rear Admiral retired Rod Melendez here, who was the executive director for 11 years and still does pretty great music on there. There he is. He did one wonderful display you're going to see on Thursday. I think you're going to like it. I know you're going to like it. Also, Sheldon Margolis, the current executive director, and his lovely wife, Elizabeth, is back there. I had the great pleasure of getting to know them as I prepared this reunion. We got in trouble together here in San Diego. Probably not the kind of trouble a lot of you guys got in, but we did get into some trouble, and we had some fun doing it, I think. But it was Sheldon who encouraged me to make that wonderful little museum there a part of our reunion. And it's probably going to be one of the highlights of our reunion. I truly believe that. And what a pleasure to have our 4C cadets. We had the pleasure of sitting here with David. I'll tell you, I'd take him as a grandson any day. Yes. And his mom is here, who led them, Jody Lockman. And she did it. She does a great job. And so we're thankful they're also going to be with us tomorrow at the Midway. We have J.C. Young and Kim Young and Madison Jade Underwood here with us somewhere. I don't see them. Are you there? There they are. They're representing Estelle Young. I don't know if any of you remember Estelle, but she worked in the shipyards in Orange, Texas. And we met her there some 15 years ago or so, and she's attended past reunions, but she's unable to be here with us today. But she has her 3.5-year-old granddaughter here, who is also the youngest person we have here. So we have a special certificate for her to take home and to share with Grandma. So we'll give that to you. So we are also going to give you a little sailor's hat. We got a couple other young'uns here too, and I think we got sailor's caps for them as well. So make sure to ask me for that. We'll give them to you later. And I did not forget Brian Davies from New Zealand, a good friend of the USS Orlick. Let's hear it for Brian. And when I think of Brian, I think of Gerald Hanna. And I thought of Gerald Hanna quite a bit. And I thought, you know, Gerald would love to be here with us tonight. And I called his wife and I told him that I wanted to do something special. I wanted to dedicate this reunion to Gerald Hanna. Brian, come on up. Brian and Gerald had a special friend relationship, and this is what we prepared to send on to and you'll be able to see it. Maybe we'll put it in the hospitality room and we can all sign it on the back. And I'll read this. You want to read it? You want me to read it?
There you go.
It says, Gerald Hanna was a sailor serving aboard USS Orlick DD 886 from 1966 to 69. On 30 October 2012, Gerald, the chief, left us and went to be with the Lord. We can look forward to a day when we will have a reunion there with Gerald and our other good friends, but today we miss his presence. Gerald loved his time aboard USS Orlick and his service to his country. Gerald also served the men of the USS Orlick as an officer of our association. We remember him well for his numerous posts on the website. He did special duty on the forum and posted more than anyone, and quite possibly did more posts than all of the posts put together. He regularly posted his gastronomic creations, some cooked in those big coppers, and served to many of you aboard the USS Orlick. The recipes are still posted there for all to see, cook, and enjoy. Gerald was a good friend to many of us. He had many interests, including model trains, but his stated first interest was the USS Orlick. He was a strong advocate and supporter of our efforts to properly save and restore USS Orlick in the years following her return from Turkey. He was a humble man, very loyal, very true. Gerald would sign off his post on the website every time with Gerald Hanna, USS Orlick DD 886, 1966 to 69. Freedom is not free. We all paid some paid all. So on 11 August 2014, at the opening night banquet in San Diego, our 2014 reunion was dedicated to Gerald to honor him. The document will be delivered to June, his wife, and family. And I'd like Brian to just share a couple words about Gerald.
Well, first and foremost, I apologize for my accent. I can understand yours, but you probably can't understand me. I was adopted by the Orlick 43 years ago when she came to New Zealand in 1972. We took a sailor home for half an hour. He ended up being with us for 2 days. I adopted that sailor, he adopted me. Since then, we've lost that sailor. Not that he's passed away, but we just can't find him. Me and Bob have been looking for 20 years for him. Still can't find him. I was adopted 7 years ago by Gerald Hanna. who sent me an email every day for 7 years solid. And I sent him one back every day. I'm getting a bit upset thinking of Gerald at this moment. He became a very good friend of mine and my wife. And I think we've got a gentleman here, I don't know if he's here today, called Steve Miller. I don't know if he's here, he said he was coming, but I got the most beautiful letter when my wife passed away from Steve, and I would have loved to have met him also. Anyway, thank you all very much for adopting me. P.S. I adopted you as well. You'll have me crying in a minute.
I had a special badge made up for you. It's going to replace this. I apparently still out there in my briefcase, but it says Brian Davies. What is that? The Kiwi Division USS Orlick.
Well, I always can I say another few words? When I write to Bob in emails, I always sign off at the bottom of the email. Brian Davies, member of the New Zealand Division of DD 886, Kiwi Orlick. I get fed up of talking to myself because I'm the only bloody member.
Yeah. Well, in appreciation for traveling long distances, by the way, anybody out want to claim coming from the furthest distance? You better be more than 8,743.95 miles.
It's a long walk.
Yeah. So in appreciation for traveling long distances, 8,743.95 miles, more or less, a great cost and discomfort, flying many long hours, 23, from New Zealand to San Diego to attend the August 11th, 15th, 2014 gathering and reunion of the men, their families, and friends of USS Orlick, the greatest destroyer to have ever sailed the sea. Congratulations to Brian, the longest member Kiwi Orlick, New Zealand Division, DD 886, not only on gallantly traveling the furthest to the reunion, but to any reunion ever held by the USS Orlick, DD 886 reunion group anywhere. Now, we have a very ambitious program this evening, but before we get into that, I have a little bit of housekeeping to do. What we are doing tomorrow, board the buses at the Royal Palms. That's when you go out of the tower that we're in, you walk down to the left and to the right, and you're back there in that big parking area, and that's where the buses are going to be. We board at 9:15, we leave at 9:30. We are not counting or waiting. We will pull out at 9:30 whether you're there or not. Please listen to the words of the bus monitors. We have 3 bus monitors, and especially on Thursday, you better listen to them or you're not going to have much fun. So that's just that. I know this is an ambitious night ahead of us, but I want to do a couple other things. I want to see some indication who make up this group. I want to know, you can hold up your hands. I was told that filming would be affected by standing too much, so hold up your hands if you're a USS Orlick sailor. Great. Now, put your hands down. Family of USS Orlick sailors, raise their hands. Keep your hands up. Now, friends, add your hands to that. Pretty good number, about half and half, I would say. Yeah. Now, USS Orlick who served in World War II. Hold up your hand. Let's stand up. You stand up. Can you? Well, you don't have to stand up. Let's give them a round of applause. There's 2 of them. 2 of them? What about Korea? Hands up. You know, when we started doing these 21 years ago and I stood up here, I was the youngest guy here. Now I'm looking out here with all the Vietnam guys and I'm the oldest guy up here, you know. Let's see Vietnam. Look at that. You know, I can only say one thing. I can only say one thing. Welcome home. Welcome home. And I want to see the USS Orlick sailors who serve in peacetime. And don't you wish we had more of those? Now, we gave quite a bit of recognition there by an applause for George Gideon and Louis Jaguki. You will hear them later, too, talk, but they're both plank owners, which means they were on the original commissioning ship of the USS Orlick. That's a special privilege they have, and it's a joy to have them with us. We have a couple of special gifts, and I'll give them to you later, but I'm going to show them now. One is a certificate. Plank owner certificate. Very nice. This is even nicer. The button that was the ruptured duck that was given, the button that's given at the World War II for honorable discharges from World War II. And we have this one, and it's on leather, carved on leather by Chase Staples, one of our own. It's beautiful. It has George Gideon's name on it. And this one has Louis F. Jaguki's name on it. Thank you folks for being with us. One last bit of housekeeping. Has anybody been to every reunion? Every reunion? Anybody? There's one there. Pinners. Pinners have been to every reunion. Okay, has everybody been to every reunion plus the memorial service at Arlington? Anybody that's been to that, stand up. Memorial service and all the reunions as well. There's only one. But I have a special recognition for the Pinners. Kenneth Pinners not only served his country aboard the best Gearing-class destroyer in the history of the United States, but for leading an exemplary life, raising a wonderful family, supporting the association, and seeing to it that many of his family members have participated in our reunions. Destroyer USS Orlick Association began in 1993 as reunions. As of this reunion, Kenneth Pinner and Betty Pinner have attended each and every one of the 11 official reunions. In addition, they have brought many of their families. So this year, we have decided to change the name of the reunion to the Pinner Family Reunion instead of I'll give you this later. Well, I hope you finish your dessert, because come on up, guys. Anybody that's speaking, I want them to come up and take their chairs. Joe Orlick. This is really the beginning of the program. Joe Orlick was born in Columbus, Ohio on June the 22nd, 1906, to Maximilian and Rebecca Orlick. They left the Ukraine during the 1904 Russian Revolution. Joe enlisted in the Navy at age 18, stayed in the Navy until he received his command of the USS Nauset AT-89. During the invasion of Salerno, a German bomber dropped a bomb from high, striking the USS Nauset. Lieutenant Orlick got the survivors off onto other ships. And when the Nauset righted itself, he went back aboard to receive lines for towing, so to salvage the vessel. It was then that it hit a mine, and he went down with his ship. Shortly afterwards, the Navy named a Gearing-class destroyer in his honor, commissioned on September 15, 1945. Nowhere else but in America could such a thing happen, I believe. She served honorably through the period after World War II through Korea and Vietnam. It was in 1962 that she was modified to meet the needs for more advanced weaponry. Her superstructure was removed and a new one was put in place. She looked different. As a matter of fact, those attending reunions in later years said that she was not the ship they served on. I had the opportunity to write a short piece from the viewpoint of the ship when these old, balding, fat guys boarded her then. She said, "These were not the handsome, wavy-haired young men who served on me." Then they went inside and realized that she was the same ship. And the ship looked in their hearts and realized that they were the same men. And tonight we are going to paint for you a visual picture, a mental picture, not of two different looking ships, but of a continuum of 37 years of one ship serving with excellence. We will do that through the hearts and minds of the men through the period that served on them. Points in her history were picked, and those attending were asked to speak to those same periods they served. Most of the names were just randomly chosen. Others will have the opportunity to have their film story told this next Wednesday as well. We couldn't get everybody up here tonight. But for now, let's enjoy what these men have to say, and let's keep our minds focused on seeing the ship develop before our very minds as they speak. I will introduce each one simply with their name and years served. They will speak of their time and history aboard the USS Orlick, their feelings about that, and maybe some significant event. Each person is to speak 3 minutes or a bit longer, and I will fill in some details of the USS Orlick history. The USS Orlick was commissioned at the end of World War II. Serving as plank owners were Louis Jaguki, F. Jaguki, and George Gideon. And Louis is up there first. So, Lou?
This mic?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I was on the USS Orlick from 1945 to 1946. It was commissioned in September 45. I'm a plank owner. Early in 1946, it showed through. Yeah, that's all right. World War II was drawing to a close, and the USS Orlick was on a shakedown cruise at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, was our base. We learned how to operate the ship by testing anti-sub equipment, ability to fire the ships, and abilities to fire ship's guns, the 3 twin 5-inch 50s, and the 20 and 40 millimeter anti-aircraft guns. And we also did other things to train the crew for the work that we had to do ahead. I was assistant engineer, and my duties were training of firemen, boiler tenders, electricians, and machinists mates on how to operate the equipment on the ship. I did shore patrol duty and officers of day duties. Being on the Orlick allowed me to show what training I had to instruct the crew on their duties in a manner that was not a demand but an official order as promulgated by the captain. Also, while on liberties, I met my wife, Isabel, at the Cuban Annual American Club in San Diego, Cuba, which was equivalent to the USO. That was a couple miles away from the Guantanamo Bay where we were stationed. And we were married and had 3 wonderful children. After the shakedown cruise, we went through the Panama Canal to San Diego, where we trained for approximately 3 months, operating with other ships on anti-submarine screening as if we were a task force setting. Early 1946, we went to Pearl Harbor, where we witnessed the horrific damage done by the Japanese on our fleet. After we left Pearl Harbor, we stopped at the islands of Guam, Wake on the way to our assignment at Hainan Strait, where we were the mothership to a group of wooden-hulled minesweepers. The Hainan Strait was located between the Hainan Island and the south coast of China. This put the Orlick at serious risk because they were magnetic mines, and we certainly, if the sweepers didn't sweep out the mines, well, if we hit one, we'd have a lot of damage and maybe some casualties. Another one of our assignments was to go to Shanghai and help with the occupation force in China, where Japan had previously occupied the region. Then my time was up in Shanghai on July 46. My office training and experience aboard the USS Orlick taught me how to encourage my crew to do their job efficiently without making demands, which also helped me with my civilian career later. Thank you very much.
George Gideon, 1945, 1946.
I don't have too much to say because he said just about everything. When I went in, I was a deckhand. I had KP duty, and the chief come up and asked me, he said, Gideon, would you like to be a cook striker? And I said, yep, that sounds pretty good to me, chief. So I become a cook striker, and I was a cook the whole time I was on the ship. And that was 45 and 46. And to me, those are the great years of my life. Was aboard the USS Orlick. That's about all I got to say.
Norman Tyrrell, 1945-46. Well, I think that's right on those dates. Will tell his thoughts about serving right after World War II, as will Chase Staples, who will follow him.
I quit school at the age 17 and joined the Navy. Right away I went aboard the Orlick. And we headed for China. We went to Pearl Harbor, Guam, Saipan, on into Hong Kong. When I first went aboard, I was assigned to the deck crew. So I served 2 or 3 days chipping paint and painting. And I requested to be a storekeeper, and which was accepted. And I was in there a short period of time, and I became the dispersing storekeeper, which means I took care of the allotments for the sailors to send money home to their families. And I had to figure all the pay and help in the pay line. And my wife gets tired of hearing me say I had the best job aboard ship, which I did. But anyhow, we went straight to China, and which was a good voyage. I enjoyed Hong Kong, and I enjoyed all of them. Shanghai, Tsingtao, and then we made 2 stops in Japan, Yokosuka and Sasebo, I think. And at that time, we sailed back to San Diego. And by that time, my 2-year enlistment was near about over. By the time we got back, I went back to Durham, North Carolina, and went back to high school and got a little bit more education. But I think serving aboard the Orlick turned my life around. And I wanted to do a little bit better than what I had started off at. But serving aboard the Orlick and the people that I served with, it was just fantastic. And I enjoyed all of it. And I enjoy these reunions put on by Bob, too. Thank you.
Chase Staples, 1946-47.
Yes, I've always heard that the military says, give me the boy and I'll give you the man. And that's probably true. I went down to join the Navy in 1945. Went home, took the papers to my mother, and my mother and father were separated. And I took the papers to my mother, and she said, I'm not going to sign. I said, well, why not? Well, my father was an officer in the Navy, and he was in the Pacific. And she said, I'm not going to sign without his permission. So that put me back several months in getting in the Navy. But I finally got in. And when I finished boot camp, they asked me, says, what kind of duty would you like to have? And I said, I'd like to have a destroyer. And I said, okay. He said, well, where would you like to go? And I said, as far away as I can get. And he said, what kind of answer is that? I said, well, you were paying for it. So I certainly don't want to hang around here. So away I went. And that put me on the Orlick. And I've been very fortunate. I was in ship service. I got to meet most all of the crew and officers. And it was just, the whole time I was there, I can sum it up very simple. And my 2 years on the Orlick and these reunions and meeting Bob and his family, it's just been priceless. Thank you.
March 1948, USS Orlick joins Task Force 7 in an Eniwetok Atoll, participated in atomic energy commission experiments. In May of 1948, USS Orlick transported National Geographic scientists and correspondents from Yokosuka to the northernmost Japanese island of Rubenjima to witness and record the eclipse of the sun in June. In 1949, the USS Orlick collided with the submarine USS Perch. In 1950 brings the Korean War. USS Orlick is fired upon by shore batteries. In July 1952, Orlick patrolled west coast of Communist Korea with Task Force 95 and took assigned blockade and bombardment missions. It was during this time that Orlick initiated the Train Busters Club by destroying 2 enemy ammunition trains. Bob Peterson, 1949 to 52.
Well, I was 18 years old, working for the newspaper in Sacramento. One lunch hour, a buddy of mine says, let's go down and join the Navy. So I went down and joined the Navy. Well, I was drafting then, you know. I didn't want to go in the draft and go in the Army or Marines. So the recruiting officer asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, well, he went down the list, and he got the sonar. I said, what's that? And he says, well, that's detection of submarines. I said, they have sonar in submarines? He said, yeah. I said, that's it, that's what I. So I went to sonar school for 6 months, went aboard, after finishing that, went aboard the Quick, put it out of commission, and 5 months later, and went aboard the Orlick in August of 1949 at Mare Island. We went over to the Korean War, and we did a lot of train busting. We saved, there was some articles that I left up in the room up there. You can read about them, all those I've saved. Anyway, one incident was, how many of you guys have been to Wonsan Harbor? Okay, there's some back there. Wonsan Harbor is about 100 miles above the 38th parallel that divides North and South Korea. And the Orlick and the Parks went in there in April 51, and we anchored. And we were there to protect an LST that had 2 helicopters on it that went in and rescued downed pilots that would crash or bail out of their planes. We were told that there was something going to happen on May the 1st. That's a communist 4th of July. Well, they fooled us. I was up taking a picture of the sunset on April 29th, I was up on the fire control mountain, and all of a sudden, against the sunset, there was the nicest geyser you ever saw. And I thought, man, that's pretty. And then I heard the report. And about the time that I got down to the bridge, Ensign Quinn was ringing the klaxon and saying, General quarters, this is no drill. So I started down the ladder to go to the sonar, and the captain was coming out of his cabin, and he says, Peterson, you're my talker, get up there. So I grabbed the phones, and he started talking. I tell him what man was taught. The forecastle says, bridge, forecastle? I said, aye. He said, there is no electricity on the capstan. He says, get an electrician down here quickly. So I told the captain, he says, okay, well, get up there and get it done. Well, no, nothing. So finally the forecastle says, bridge, forecastle, permission to slip the anchor. Well, the anchor is held by a pelican hook that has a latch on the end. And he had the sledgehammer in his hand, and he was going to cut it loose. And I asked the captain, he says, permission denied. He had the ship going back full bore, and he thought he could drag that thing. Well, he was thought because his water was going by us, he thought he was going backwards. So the forecastle says, permission to slip the anchor. He says, permission denied. I told the forecastle, permission denied. The forecastle asked again, and about the time I said, permission, number 2 mount, let go with both guns, and that bosun mate hit that pelican hook, and there went the chain. We searched for 3 days for that chain, for that anchor, and we never did find it, and that bud once on harbor. But we knocked the hell out of those field pieces, I'll tell you. We shot for 2 hours, and our deck was full of just casings all over, and I got pictures of it. So that's my experience. I knew I wasn't in the peacetime Navy anymore. I was in the real war. So thank you very much.
After losing power, a helicopter from the cruiser Los Angeles crashed, landed on the Orlick fantail. It sustained only minor damage as it missed the depth charges and barely missed the 5-inch gun mount. An Orlick officer, Lieutenant R.B. Rowe, had been on the USS Los Angeles and had been returned by helicopter to his ship, the USS Orlick. The helicopter hovered over the fantail and lowered a ladder on which Lieutenant Rowe climbed to the deck and then had to scramble out of the way as the helicopter dropped to the fantail with a thud. September 1953, Orlick engaged in shore bombardment off western coast of Korea. A man was lost overboard in an 80-knot gale while proceeding to Hong Kong, but the man was expertly recovered in mountainous waves. Later, an officer was lost overboard when en route to Buckner Bay. Leo Lakowitz, machinist mate, and others were trying to secure fire hoses that could be washed overboard during high seas. And tremendous winds when Leo was washed overboard and into the raging sea. He was expertly rescued by the men of the USS Orlick, especially Moose Leyendecker. October 1954, Orlick spending much of her time in the China Sea near the Philippines and Formosa, and was in rough seas most of the time, dodging 5 typhoons. During her tour with Task Force 72 on the Formosa patrol, the Orlick also suffered battering winds of the Chinese monsoon. While on the Formosa patrol, the Orlick was in Formosa when the Chinese communists invaded the Tachin Islands, and USS Orlick patrolled during the Tachin Island crisis just prior to their evacuation. And just prior to fueling operations during rough weather, on the 17th of December, the Orlick received water over the port side from the heavy seas which tore a large hole in the ship's post office. Don Rafe, 1952 to 55. Don Rafe.
Yeah, I went overboard in 52, and I got off in 55. But I'd have to back up a little bit on these stories here, because 52, I think it was, Chiang Kai-shek got run off, pardon me, got run off the mainland and had to go across the Formosa Straits to Formosa, where he set up his stronghold. And they, Chinese were coming after him over there, and we were running a protection, keeping the junks from coming across the straits to invading there in Formosa. And as I remember it, after we
Hey Don, I have a question for you. How did it feel to serve on board the USS Orlick? What age were you? And
great, but we run against I forget how many sampans that we completely destroyed that were coming over to invade him there in Formosa. And we left there and we went down to the Philippines, and the carrier, I think it was Bonhomme Richards, was running with us, and we went down to the Philippines, and they had another outbreak while we were down there, and they had a big percentage of their flyers were on the beach, and they had to return to Formosa to protect the invasion. And the pilots were all on the beach, and we had to take all the pilots aboard ship and return with them on our ship. And we had the largest, one of the largest, or I think maybe the largest highline transfer in the history of the Navy, transferring all the pilots back onto the carrier. And we were in rough weather, and so I forget the year this was. It was 52, 53. But then speaking of the train, we had
you remember you were on the deck when that happened, or where were you?
When the train?
When they got the train, yeah.
Oh yeah, we got a train there one night, and they got the engineer, or the engine had sparks from and the lookouts spotted it, and our main battery director got the first round. We got the train in between the tunnel, and they took the engine out, and we completely emptied our magazines. Yeah, we completely emptied our magazines, and we had no more, nothing left but star shells. And 2 days later, they rebuilt that railroad bed up, and we got another train in exactly the same spot.
Yeah.
And
That was Captain Yates, right?
yeah, Eddie Yates, and they gave us a plaque. Call it the Train Smashers. I still got that at home.
Okay.
But it was an interesting time aboard ship, that's for sure. And
Thank you, Don.
A lot of memories.
Appreciate it. Bob Mickelson, 1957 to 60.
Yes, I served on the Orlick 2 years, 4 months, and 27 days. Some of the happiest times of my life. Wow. The only thing the Orlick taught me is I don't like atomic bombs, and I never wanted to be a mechanic when I got out of the Navy, because that's what I was on the Orlick. Oh, God. Smell like diesel fuel all the time. Your nails were a mess all the time. Couldn't get them clean. God, it was, oh, don't laugh, that's true. Well, anyway, how many atomic veterans we got here? Raise your hand. See, the other guys were in a war or something, but we were in the atomic bomb test. And we took Atoll and Bikini, last outside atomic bomb test the United States had. Yes, sir. They gave us these tags to wear around our neck. I said to the chief, what are these for? He says, well, if you get radiation poisoning, it'll turn purple. I said, all right, thank you very much. What do we do then? Well, you go see Doc Reynolds. If he's sober, he'll tell you. That's fine, fine, fine. I never got radiation poisoning, I don't think. But I remember when my 2 daughters and my son back here, when they were teenagers, their teeth and fingernails glowed at night. So I figured, oh my God, what do I do now? That was tough, I'm telling you. Wasn't it, Matt? I lost my place. Oh, my son and I got here. We left North Carolina at 5:30, got here around 2:30. First time in 9 years I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Because since I retired, I don't have an alarm clock. I get up when I wake up. Who cares? I do what I want to do. Now I do. It's a shame, but my wife passed away about 6 years ago. So, yes, but I can do what I want to do now. I miss her. So, that's my thing. But the Orlick was a good ship. I remember all the men from the Orlick that I served with. They were nice people, greatest people in the world. And we had one guy, I haven't seen him since I left the ship. He was from Texas, and his name was Jimmy Reed. Does anybody remember him? He was the funniest guy I ever heard in my life. He'd be out there playing the guitar, and he'd say, you know, Texas, biggest state in the United States. Yeah, Jimmy, we all know that. Well, you know how big it is. Snake went by my house one night, took him 2 days and 2 nights to go by. Tomato plant busted in town and flooded out the whole damn town. He was a funny guy, funny guy. I miss him. I miss a lot of the guys that were on the ship. It was a lot of fun. I had a good time. Met a lot of nice people. And that, all my experience in the U.S. Navy, I enlisted in the Navy before I graduated high school. I graduated high school June 28th, July 6th, I was in boot camp in Bainbridge, Maryland. And I was just a kid when I went in. And the Navy is what helped me grow up. If it wasn't for the Navy, I wouldn't be what I am today. I want everybody to know that. And I think y'all feel the same. It was nice speaking to y'all. Hope to see you next year. Now, I want to thank Bob Orlick and everybody that does these reunions because it's a lot of fun. have a good time. And I hope y'all are having a good time too. Thank you very much.
Newt Ward, 1957 to 59.
Bob, it's not fair because Mickelson and I were on at the same time, and I'm not nearly as funny as he is. Also, he stole most of my thunder. I went on board in 1957, served 3 years. I served as first lieutenant, communications officer, navigator, and operations officer before I got off. And really the most significant thing that we did during those 3 years was the Inuiatak nuclear test, the last, as he said, above ground. There was a surface burst, a subsurface burst, and an air burst. And we were close enough during the subsurface burst that the shock knocked the pin out of our rudder. And we were afraid we were going to run over the submarine that was down below to see what was going to happen to it. But we didn't. And after that, we were rewarded by being able to go to New Zealand for R&R, and it was a great time. Other than that, the other significant things when I was on board, we served for a while as Station Ship Hong Kong, and that was a blast. We did Formosa Patrol, and that was the nearest we came to getting in combat during the 3 years that I was on board. The Chinese sampans had signals they had to run up every day if they came close to us. And one day, here comes this little boat alongside, and he can't get the signal up. So we had #1 mount trained on him, ready to blow him out of the water. And he finally got the signal up. But going back to one last thing, after the Inuiatak trip, we went down to, as I said, we went down to New Zealand for R&R. And when we were down there, we met a lovely young lady named Lorraine Painter. And she's here tonight. And she's married to Fred Leonard, an ex-Orlick sailor, and they've been married for 54 years.
1958, they visited New Zealand. A small sailboat was sighted overturned with 2 young boys clinging to a capsized hull. 2 young New Zealanders were brought aboard the Orlick. They were fed, given warm clothes, and entertained by the crew before being put to shore. 1959, on the 11th, Westpac Tour served as flagship for the Commander Destroyer Squadron 21. Ron Supancic will speak, 1958 to 60.
I was born lucky. I was too young for Korea and too old for Vietnam. I was 19 in September of 1958. I'd finished A school, B school, C school, and I was ready to report aboard the USS Orlick as a brand new Seaman First Class striking for fire control. What was really fortunate, somehow I got on the engine order telegraph on sea duty, and then I wound up in the pilot house, and then back in after steering, and eventually I got to be the helmsman. So I got to drive without having any of the responsibility. I was the helmsman at sea detail. And the moment when Bob asked me to share a moment from the Orlick and what the Orlick meant to be, it was instantaneous. I knew what that moment was. It was leaving Hunters Point. After they got back from New Zealand, we were in San Diego for a while, and then we went up to Hunters Point, and we went through some repairs before making another Westpac cruise. I was sea detail helmsman, and I was at the helm when we left Hunters Point in pitch black. And it was silent in the pilot house. Nobody was talking, and orders were being given, but I'm watching the sky as the sun is coming up. And I'm watching slowly as the clouds turn from black to purple to bright red to golden to white, and I watched the sky unfold. And in that moment, it was as though it was a sacrament of service. I knew who I was. I knew what I was doing. I knew I was in the right place at the right time with the right people, and I was surrounded by men who were committed to me, just as I was committed to them. Now, I lived many years and done many things in my life. I was fortunate to be present at the birth of 4 children and 4 grandchildren. And as wonderful and as great as those moments were, I've never had a feeling in my life of being so completely self-expressed, fulfilled, aware and conscious as I did on those moments passing under the Golden Gate Bridge, watching the sky come alive and the universe open up. I still take a Navy shower. I learned that on the Orlick. I still like beans and hard eggs. When my wife wants to give me a special treat, she'll serve Navy beans with the crumbled up hard-boiled eggs. Many, many memories and many moments. But I had to share that one moment. I know that each of you who were on that amazing ship, on the journey that we all took together, have moments like that to share. I hope in the next 4 days to get to know each one of you. I hope that you'll give me the honor of sharing a moment with me that you had on the Orlick. And Bob, thank you so much for this wonderful, wonderful event.
Thank you for those words. In 1962, while in the Philippines, Orlick participated with 65 ships, including aircraft carriers, cruisers, troop transports, and destroyers in Operation Tulungan, the biggest SEATO exercise ever held. August 1962, Orlick returned to the West Coast for fleet rehabilitation and modernization. The Mark I overhaul and conversion brought on board the newest in technical equipment and weaponry, including ASROC and Dash. November 1963, we received the terrible news that President John F. Kennedy is assassinated. Larry Collins, 1962 to 64.
Thank you, Bob. I went aboard when I was 17 in Subic Bay, the Philippines, with my brother and Bobby McKee, Lee, and Mines. I went aboard a machinist mate, striker, and standing at 7 o'clock in the morning, after the breaks, where the forward firearm hatch was, I asked one of the ship's company, "What's down there?" He says, "That's where everybody with the red stripes goes, Boot." And I ripped him off, and he says, "Tell him you want to be a decade." So I became a boatswain right there. Sailed westback for a year, came back home to the States, offloaded the ammunition and fuel, and went into Fram. And they cut the ship up. Stood a lot of fire watches, got flash burned, and one day they had us clean off the deck, and we slung a lot of sheet steel over the side. And here comes a barge. And this barge had the O1 level forward, the O2 level, the bridge, the signal bridge, and everything in one big chunk. And one of those big cranes lifted that puppy off, set it in place, and set it on wedges, started cutting the metal part of the superstructure to match the deck, and welded it down. That was amazing. And the ship before had a crowded bridge. Mr. Summers can attend to that. We had a helmsman, a lee helmsman, 2 port and starboard watches. We had a quartermaster, a boatswain of the watch, and a messenger of the watch. And then we had an officer of the deck and a junior officer of the deck. If anybody turned too fast, somebody else got bumped. The bridge was so small. On the new Orlick, you could put another 10 people up there and not bump into anyone. We had a big, massive bridge. She got to be a much better ship, much more comfortable. The berthing spaces were better. Everything about the ship had improved dramatically, but we still didn't get air conditioning. So anyway, while we're going through Fram, I met my lovely wife, Margaret, and got married 52 years ago. So that was my time on Big O. Thank you.
During tour of duty in 1964, Orlick was involved in several big operations. Operation Starlight, Piranha, Double Eagle. 1965, assigned to Western Pacific Recovery Force TF-130 for Gemini 4 spaceflight. May 1966, before returning to Long Beach in June, the ship spent the final 2 months of deployment on the gun line and fired 11,741 rounds of 5-inch ammunition. Orlick had to have her gun mounts replaced as a result. Orlick became known as Top Gun Westpac. Hank Carmen, 1964-66.
Saddle up, saddle up, saddle up. That was GQ. You guys 64, 62, or 64 to 66 probably well remember that. And I think the XO we had at the time started that. It was like we'd hear that sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, because every time we had a gunfire support, that's what we heard. Everybody went to battle stations. I went aboard Orlick in 1964, June, just before the ship deployed. I'd been in the Navy I was on my second hitch, and I'd been in the Navy for almost 5 years. I had come off a 2100 destroyer in San Diego and had to fight to get on Orlick. It was quite an ordeal. I was trying to get the swap on there, and I come on there with some poor performance marks, mainly because of politics. But I really got on Orlick, and it was, I don't know, I ended up spending 30 years in the Navy, 30 years, 3 months, and a few days, you know. And Orlick defined my career. I was ready to get out of the Navy, you know. When I went aboard, it was serve out my time and move on to something else. It was quite a time. We got to Yokosuka. We hadn't been there more than a couple of weeks, I think, maybe 3 weeks, and Vietnam started. They had the Gulf of Tonkin incident, and we were down on the gun line and chased the carrier, Ticonderoga. And it was like that for 2 years. It was, I've never, of all the ships I served on 7 destroyer types. I never served on one that did all the things that destroyers are supposed to do and then some. I remember we towed we even towed a LST off where it got stuck down on the Mekong Delta, if I'm not mistaken, you know. I never heard of a destroyer do that before. We had, and speaking from an old Snipes viewpoint, it was, I don't know. We never lost the load. We never went DIW. At one time I was on there. We never went on water hours. I was on one ship that went on water hours as soon as it got underway, you know. The Oriskany, we never went to sea without going on water hours. We never did that on Orlick. We made every commitment. But I can tell you, I never worked with a crew that was so dedicated and so good. Anyway, there was a lot of stuff I wanted to talk about, but that 2 years, it was a wonderful time in my life. Thank you.
Thank you, Hank. Orlick has spent several days in company with a perennial resident of the seas, the Russian Eland trawler. We were fortunate on the first occasion to have a communications van aboard. Day in and day out, our Ukrainian friends were entertained with the latest selections from the Los Angeles Top 40. January 1968, Tet Offensive reached a climax. July 1969, Orlick in the Mekong Delta, she squeezed off 10,000 rounds of 5-inch ammunition. On October 12th and 13th, USS Orlick successfully passed a nuclear weapons acceptance inspection the first step on the road to recertification as a nuclear-capable ship. Phil King, 1968-70.
Thank you. I guess there's still a few people that remember my name. I got a set of orders to the Orlick in 1968, having completed a 2-year tour as weapons officer on another destroyer prior to that. And I had a little distinction there in that the Orlick came to me. I didn't have to go to it. I was in Yokosuka waiting when the Orlick came in to start a 2-year home port tour. And I brought with me a capability that the ship had never had before. And that was the ability to go find a target, observe it, identify it, classify it, destroy it, record all that, and then be able to turn around and do it again. We did that with a helicopter called a Dash. It's a project we started in 1967 prior to coming to the Orlick, but I brought the equipment with me. And of course, when the Orlick was framed, and the helicopter accommodations were included in the FRAM overhaul, it made it possible to equip these ships with that capability. And I just, that's something that we added. You were talking about the Orlick doing everything that destroyers had ever done before, and then some. Thank you.
Bob Lovey, 1968-72.
As Bob said, I came aboard the Orlick in 1968, and I served for 3.5 years. And during my time aboard the Orlick, most of the time, was spent in Westpac. We were overseas. So it was during Vietnam. So the task that we had to perform was like plane guard duty, and we'd be patrolling up and down the coast of Vietnam, plus gun line duty. And during all that time, what impressed me the most was the teamwork involved. You saw people working together, and this working together, we performed all our tasks, made all our commitments. And the second Westpac cruise I made, same thing. We had gun line duty, and it was rough. Anyone who made that cruise from 71 to 72 will know. And it was a very tiring cruise, but again, we made all our commitments. And again, what impressed me was the teamwork. As far as one of the most memorable moments, it was probably crossing the equator. Some of you will remember that. And believe me, that's something you'll never forget. And I guess nowadays, I understand they don't have it anymore. I guess it's not politically correct. But it's something that I really remember quite a bit. And then probably my most memorable is just the camaraderie, and that's what I miss the most. And I wouldn't trade my 4 years in the Navy or 3.5 years on the Orlick. Thank you.
Bob Rudicelli, 1970-72.
Well, my 1.5 years on the Orlick certainly proved pivotal in determining how my life was going to go. I started in the Navy in 1965 as an ROTC student at Brown University. And after they had paid for 4 years of my education, it was time for me to pay them back. And I had thought that having waited for the war to be over for 4 years, and it wasn't, I had hoped that maybe I could get to do something other than go under the guns. I recall Marine Corps major asking, well, how do you think of that weapon there, son? I said, actually, sir, I feel rather clumsy with it. And I thought maybe as an engineer, how about the Civil Engineering Corps? Well, that wasn't going to work either. So they asked me, where would you like to go, the East Coast or the West Coast? And I said, well, I don't think I want to spend my time welded to the pier at the East Coast because those ships weren't going that much. The West Coast, on the other hand, that sounded good. And I was very pleased with that choice as I went aboard Orlick in September of '70 as a brand new MPA, the main propulsion assistant. And with that came the responsibility and the pleasure of having 60 great guys in M and B divisions. I had 4 boilers and 2 main engines, and it was great. What was especially nice for an officer in that situation was Orlick was big enough to do it all, but she was also small enough so that all our officers, you didn't get stuck in the engine room if you were MPA. You served up on the bridge, standing watches, helping them shoot the guns during our gunfire support on the line, and also following the carrier around. The Enterprise spent the whole cruise that Bob was just speaking about, following her around, and by the way, into the Indian Ocean. It was a marvelous experience. We had done so well that they sent us home via New Zealand and Australia, which wasn't so bad either. Now, I need to add one thing about how pivotal this was. Just before I went overseas, we had went to Westpac. We'd finished in the yards with a regular overhaul period for the Orlick, and that was, tell you as an MPA, that was very educational. Seeing your boilers torn down and rebuilt and all the pumps and everything. That was great. And then refresher training. Well, just about that time, just before we deployed, I met a very lovely young woman who's seated here tonight, my wife. We corresponded very much during that 6-month cruise. As soon as I got back, we decided to get married, so she's here with me tonight. I also decided, I think while I was on the Orlick, that I'd really rather build them than drive them, which is probably why I spent the last 15 years working at Naval Surface Warfare Center doing that, helping them build it, and I just retired from there. But again, I'm very thankful for my time on the Orlick and with the people I served. Thank you all.
USS Orlick headed to the Gulf of Tonkin first to do naval gunfire support at the demilitarized zone, then joined with the USS Enterprise. Ben Loader, 1971-73.
Yes, I joined the Navy just out of high school, and I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. But I did go to boot camp up at Great Lakes in the dead of winter with wind chill factors of 75 below, and chasing snowflakes around the parking lot when it flurried. And partway through, I went to A school, Gunner's Mate A school, after I got out of boot camp. And then after that, I joined another school, ASROC school. So that was another 10 weeks of school. And once I got that completed, I got my orders to report to the Orlick. But at the time, I was in New England, and I got my orders to be shipped to the Philippines. So I had to fly all the way to the Philippines. And after 23 hours in my blues, because it was summer in New England, and it was winter in New England and summer there in the Philippines. It was a very long trip. It was almost 24-hour flight. And when I got there, the ship was not there. They had put me in transit for about 3 to 4 days because the ship had been called out on to take a commitment of another ship, and they actually left quite a few sailors on the shore. And in the meantime, they had put us in transit, and there were some other new personnel to be reporting aboard also. So there were about 20 plus crew members, and we ended up hopping a ride on an oiler and meeting the ship out somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. I don't remember where it was, but And I reported aboard the ship finally, and geez, I thought it was great. I said, the next thing I found out, we were going to Hong Kong for Christmas. And so about 3 or 4 days into the trip, I discovered we were turning around, and we were to report to the Indian Ocean to do plane guarding for the Enterprise. And that was just one of the many other things I remember about the ship. Also the liberties, the places we went to, New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong, Hawaii. We went on a midshipman cruise from San Diego all the way up to Victoria, British Columbia, with some kind of newbie officers on board. And we stopped at San Francisco for a couple days. And it was just a very interesting experience, you know, an experience that I'll never forget.
There was a ceasefire in Vietnam, signed, and USS Orlick weighed anchor, proceeded towards Singapore. We'll hear from Jocko Burks, 1973 to 75, would tell us what happened after that.
In '73, Orlick came into Tacoma, Washington, and became part of the reserve training fleet. We had an active duty crew split with the reservists, and the reservists were all experienced people, so it was an interesting time. Two things stand out. The ship had to learn how to back out 1 mile out of an 80-foot channel with marinas on both sides. And it was, for the captain the first time, it was a white knuckle affair, because you couldn't twist at the end of the channel where the Navy Reserve Center was. So that was a unique experience. We had the JOD back on the fantail with sound-powered phones to the bridge to let us know if we were going to hit anything. The second thing was talk about scrounging. Take an active crew and a reserve crew. We scrounged up a machine barge that was in reserve over at Bremerton, put it back into shape, towed it down to Tacoma, tied it up, and there was a reserve group called SAMR, Ship Activation, Maintenance, and Repair. And that became their place to operate instead of going to Bremerton, and they became our personal repair facility. It was a wonderful time.
Steve Hunt, 1976 to 1980.
Well, of course, I was in the peacetime on the Orlick. The Orlick was the reason that I stayed in the Navy and got 24 years in and retired. I just got off active duty, went in the Navy twice, got out twice, and was going to college, and a yeoman called me from the Orlick, said to come down, you know, Sunday afternoon and see what you think about the reserves. And I thought, nah, I don't think I want to do a reserve thing anymore. And he said, well, if you come down this afternoon, I'll see that you get 4 days pay, a whole weekend. I said, what time do you want me there? Back then, I really needed the money. Well, I went aboard the Orlick, and right away, a sonar chief came up to the deck and met me, and I'm a retired sonar tech. And it was a master chief that I had on my very first ship. Well, I had to stay then. But what I was getting at, and I'm glad Jocko was up here and he was talking about the experience of the reserves on the ship. And the average reserve did have a lot of time in, like myself. I had like 10 years in before I went aboard the Orlick. I enjoyed the 2-week cruises that we had. They were all a little different. I remember the first time the Orlick got underway, came down to San Diego, and the reserve crew was supposed to fly to San Diego, and we're going to take it over to Hawaii. My wife was really thrilled. She'd never been to Hawaii, and she was going to meet me there. And then we'd stay a few more days before we came back. About 2 weeks before we were scheduled to leave, the Orlick was down here on the quay wall and backed across the channel, and that's what Jocko was talking about. You know, backing out was tough. Anyway, the sonar tech on line 6 on the fantail He said they were standing there at quarters, and they were backing across the channel, and they looked around and said, "What's those red buoys mean?" And he said the whole back end of the ship raised up about 6 feet because they hit the mud and the sand. Anyway, that canceled the trip to Hawaii, and Linda was quite mad at me over that one. I wasn't even here. They had to actually send the frogmen down there and blow off that propeller and change it right down there, which took a couple weeks. So that was one 2-week vacation. We stayed right here in San Diego alongside the quay wall. On another 2 weeks active duty, we were out and doing gunfire, and as I said, and Jocko said, you know, the average reserve had a lot of time in. Well, it ended up, you know, that our gunners mates had a lot of time in, and we were shooting at the target, and we hit it 3 or 4 times, you know, and all you have to do is come close for a hit. We hit it 3 or 4 times, but the regular Navy, the regular sailors on the ship, couldn't hit the target. So what did they do? They took away our bullets till these guys got better. And then we had to carry them up forward, you know, from the after mount, you know, and give up our bullets. The last time I remember 2 weeks was most memorable. We went to Juneau, Alaska for a centennial celebration up there. And so I got a free cruise, you know, up the Inside Passage, and they paid me to do that. A lot of people pay big bucks to do that now. But we got up to Juneau, we had a great time. They had a 50 kegger party in North Douglas, if anybody's ever been up there. And parade, big parade, almost everybody in town was in the parade. There wasn't hardly anybody standing along the sidewalk. They were all in the parade. But, and leaving Juneau, that was the experience. We were supposed to get underway like at 6 o'clock in the morning and go out with the tide. And everybody got on board, everybody was there. And what happened was the tide went out a little quicker than we did. And the the bow hit the pier, and we got stuck on there. And they had to call a tug in to pull us off. So we left a big impression in Juneau. Anyway, to sum up that story, I wrote an article about this, and I sent it into Surface Warfare. First time I was ever printed in a national magazine, just for a short story. And they printed everything I said, except the anchor thing. They didn't like that, so they threw that out. Thank you very much.
I don't know if you've noticed that a lot of the things that were reported through here is that Orlick was involved in a lot of rescues. Yeah. But, you know, Joe Orlick was involved in a lot of rescues too, and he saved a lot of lives. There was the final speaker is Tony Norris, 1980-82. January 16th, Orlick got underway to train naval reservists in Puget Sound. And while leaving the Commencement Bay area, they spotted 3 victims of a capsized sailboat. And Tony will probably tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, I came aboard June of 1980. Reported aboard as what I thought was going to be the last chief engineer on the ship, and that's the way it turned out. I learned a lot about this. Was my first engineering tour, so I did some research on it, discovered, and I found out by that time that, as you've heard tonight, this was a ship that was born during a great war, and at least on paper was long past the glory days of train busting that you heard about, and also the, you know, after the 60s Fram, the gun line and plane guard duties off of Vietnam. But you walk aboard that day, as I did, in Tacoma, and you looked up the bridge wings, and there's 5 rows of battle ribbons on the bridge wings. You know the ship's been around. I still remember walking into the wardroom that first day
And up on the starboard bulkhead of the wardroom was a picture of Joe Orlick. I found a crew and the wardroom and the reserves, as a couple mentioned here, ready for any challenge and very proud of the ship. You know, by the early 70s, as was mentioned, the class of the ship was being unavoidably replaced by the newer ships in the fleet. We were transferred, the Orlick was transferred then to the very important still role of reserve training. Even then, you know, at that time, she was one of the last of the class, but there were about a dozen similar ships on both coasts at the time. Pride did run deep within the crew, all that had served with her. As I came aboard to start a very busy year, included both with and without our selected reserves. We were basically a stripped down crew. To have the full capabilities of the ship, we had to have the reserve support and valued their expertise. That year, we did everything from a 4th of July celebration back up in Juneau again. And hey, the sun doesn't set up there on the 4th of July. It's pretty much light all day. All the way from Juneau down to trips here to San Diego. So 1980 was busy. 81, we didn't slow the pace at all. Large fleet exercise down here in Southern California area. The message we received as the exercise completed was stated in part, Orlick was the oldest ship, had the fewest problems without missing a bell. That was the story of the ship. We headed home in April with the knowledge that although we were getting old, talk of decommissioning had been delayed another year. So we wound up with a change of command in July. We were at that time scheduled then for decommissioning sometime the following year with our sister ship, the only other by that time Fram left on the coast, the Higbee up in Seattle. August was another busy exercise and more kudos. In October of '81, things got really interesting. We were tasked by the Chief of Naval Operations for support in what I'm sure most of you saw eventually in the mid-'80s. That was the television miniseries, The Winds of War. During operations there, we spent about 4 days with Paramount Studios embarked, 1 day and night underway in Puget Sound. We had many of the interior, in fact, throughout the whole series, if you saw Pug Henry, the star of the show, both as a commander in the early days and as a captain later, if you saw him on the bridge or in some individual scene communication around a ship, it was filmed sometime during that 4 days on the Orlick. We had many members of the crew that played extras, group scenes. We did have a couple, even of the officers, managed to sneak in. Again, individual scenes. I remember Ron Elkins, our supply officer, got to play a messenger and deliver a message to the bridge. In another case, a guy named Eddie Renfro portrayed a mess steward. Now you got to remember, this is 1930s era. Eddie Renfro played a mess steward delivering a cup of coffee to the bridge. Eddie Renfro was our first lieutenant. The man could not have had that job during the 1930s in the scene that he was portraying. Let's face it. Times have changed. We were more than 3 days or so outside ex-USS Missouri, BB-63. She was there at inactive ship facility in Bremerton. And they had the Missouri all fixed up, painted, phony life rafts on the outer bulkheads resemble what she looked like in World War II for the large scene in the movie where President Roosevelt meets Prime Minister Churchill off the coast of Nova Scotia. And we were playing the destroyer that carried Roosevelt to him, and the Missouri was playing Her Majesty's ship, Prince of Wales. During the course of that, one morning in the wardroom, we noticed a little bit of extra attention being paid to the makeup of the star of the movie, Robert Mitchum. As most of you probably know, if you're familiar with his career, he liked to play bad guys and, you know, rough and tumble Thunder Road type of jobs. They were paying a little extra attention to his forehead that morning with the makeup. And apparently, as we discovered, previous night on the town, there had been some kind of an altercation in one of the bars out in town. We never did get the full story about that. Later, over coffee, I happened to ask him if he also thought that he might do the follow-on novel, War and Remembrance. And I don't recall exactly what he said, but it was essentially, it amounted to, they can't pay me enough. He did, however, very graciously sign both copies of the books that I brought in and happened to have with me that day. And if you recall, he did wind up doing the sequel later on. January of '82, Januaries are treacherous weather up in that part of the country sometimes. And it was mentioned about the narrow channel behind the Reserve Center. We had a reserve weekend plan that didn't go the way it was supposed to. We'd wound up, in fact, delaying departure because of extremely high winds, in fact, gale force winds at the underway time. Couple hours getting out. By the time we finally got out of the channel and turned around Browns Point, headed towards Seattle, suddenly one of the reserve lookouts thought he spotted something off the port bow. Unknown to us, earlier that morning they'd had a few sailboat races out in the Sound, and one of them had capsized in the winds. Turned out they were at the end of the group of boats, and no one else knew that they'd gone over. 4 sailors in the water. We never actually saw the ship, or the boat. As we found out later, one man apparently managed to get back onto the ship, or to the sailboat, and try to route it, or rewrite it. But the other 3, 2 women and a man, were in the water, and the wind was pushing them away from the boat a lot faster than they had any chance to recover. And that was what we currently had in our sights. We put swimmers in over the side after maneuvering close to them, brought them aboard. By that time, they'd been in that frigid water almost 90 minutes, which is, in that water, 40 degrees. Hey, that's the limit of human endurance. We brought them up into the wardroom, which is forward battle dressing, as all of you know. Tried to warm them up as best we could. We knew we couldn't get back into port fast enough, just the nature of the ship. Tacoma fortunately had a fireboat. They came out, picked up these 3 survivors, and took them into hospital. They all survived. The sailboat was located later in the day by the Coast Guard. They searched until dark that night. They never did find the 4th sailor. But if it hadn't been that day for a sharp lookout, and maybe with a little help of Bob's uncle, the sea would have gotten 3 more that day. That spring we had more underway as usual. Then suddenly the Higbee up in Seattle, our sister ship, was decommissioned, which now made us the last of our class on the West Coast. The CO had the supply officer put in another order of ship's decals and added "We best save the best for last" to that order. Summer 1982, we then had usual Tacoma celebrations, 4th of July, anchor out in the middle of the harbor, entertain guests, all the celebrations, that sort of thing. Pulled back in behind the reserve center, thought it was going to be quiet. Less than 2 weeks later, we got an emergency message that said, "Get underway now." Apparently, one of the other ships that was stationed up north could not make a commitment. There was a Russian intelligence vessel out off of Cape Flattery, keeping an eye on our ballistic missile submarines operations in and out of Bangor. Managed to squeeze in a barbecue on the fantail while we were out there for that boring duty. But unexpected weekend, so on the way back, the CEO asked me what I thought of the situation, and I said I thought we ought to get back soon. So he said, okay, permission granted to add some boilers. We were less than 3 months from decommissioning, and for about 3 hours we did well over 30 knots. We were coming home. In August, our Turkish allies accepted the offer to have the ship join their fleet. Earlier that year, a vacationing Marine Corps major, retired, had a guy named McLaughlin, had visited and toured the ship. And Mac had mentioned to our XO during that visit that he thought he knew a nephew of Joe Orlick that lived out in Vermont, and he might be interested in the fate of the ship. Well, after having done the organizational preparation that summer for the decommissioning, the XO, Bill Donnelly, got orders in early August, so that made me, in addition to engineer, also acting XO. Shipmates, I have to tell you, when a certain small town pharmacist and I first spoke early that fall on the phone, I quickly learned that he knew only that the Navy had big gray things out there that we called ships, one of which happened to be named after his Uncle Joe. I also rapidly concluded that Bob, although he had a vague idea about gray, to him, big was a very, very relative term. He had absolutely no concept of what the word ship or shipmate meant. But yes, the family was interested, wanted to join us if possible for decommissioning. Well, Bob's business commitments unfortunately prevented his attendance on the 1st of October. However, his lovely wife Barbara and their 2 children, who happened to be very close to Sherry and I's children's age, came out for the ceremonies. During the very limited time we had, just over that weekend, we did the best we could. My family, myself, and the entire crew of the ship, to explain what the last 37 years, thousands of us, literally, had served in the Orlick, their uncle's namesake, each of us having left a small bit of our soul in her steel for shipmates who were to follow. After decommissioning, I stayed on for another 6 weeks, mobile training team to assist the Turkish Navy, their preparations for a long voyage home. Machinist mate Chief Campbell and I then cast off the last line as what was then TCG Ucitepe departed for Turkey. For 16 years, D-345 was often their fleet flagship. It was the pride of their fleet. They fought that ship on the gun line during Desert Storm, in '91. When finally in '98 they were in receipt of, like we'd passed Orlick to them, newer ships, this time from the Germans, the German Navy. One of their officers at the decommissioning ceremony of Ujatepe commented to Bob, who, as you recall, missed Tacoma, and as it turned out, this was the first time that he was actually walking the decks of his uncle's ship. This officer made a comment to him of, given a choice of which to take to war, those new German ships that they were getting, or the Orlick, he would have preferred the Orlick. Almost 3 years later, some 18 years after leaving Tacoma, through the monumental efforts of some that have spoke here tonight, other shipmates now departed, and Bob, our ship was returned to us. I was, after casting off the last line in Manchester, in Washington, I was fortunate to be on the seawall in Texas, catch the first heaving line ashore. I took it home with me, selfishly, kept it for 11 months until that first reunion after that. That was, I think, the ship's 5th reunion. And at that point, we auctioned it off. We auctioned it off for safekeeping because the museum down there wasn't ready to take it. They didn't have a place for it. Safekeeping until we were to meet again, and also to raise money for the association to preserve and protect and keep our traditions going. Shipmates, that tradition must now continue. Help preserve the memories of Joe Orlick and his ship through our association and its efforts. Shipmates, all of you. And I say that including the wives and family because, hey, we were out playing with our toys, girls, and you were home taking care of us and letting us do it. So thank you. Thank you for everything you've done. Bob?
Thank you. That was a very nice wrap-up, wasn't it? And did you get the picture of 2 ships, or did you get the picture of 1 ship with just an excellent 37 years? I got that. And didn't we have wonderful speakers? These are better than anybody we brought from outside. I can say that what Tony said was probably true, except that as a result of Mac bringing those items home and the newspaper putting the pictures in the newspaper, and Charlie Boothroyd from the USS Kennedy, who came by and saw it and called me and said, why don't you come down to the Kennedy? And I went down to the Kennedy and started working on the Kennedy. And I joined Tin Can Sailors, and I got the first edition. And Phil Klotz said, why isn't there a USS Orlick Association for reunions? And I called him up and I said, I have no idea, but let's do it. So I'm a pretty quick learner, you know? So, and yes, you know, things developed. We grew to be the largest, we grew to be the best, and you couldn't have done that without having the best ship. One of the things that has happened that we didn't realize that in 1982, after that time, the Department of Defense had not really determined what awards USS Orlick was entitled to when she was in Vietnam. And we found out. I did a little research. I talked to Commander Gooden. He was right on. He did the work, pointed it out to me, showed me how to do the work. We came up with the fact that USS Orlick had earned 14 battle stars in Vietnam, the most of any other ship. And we said, that's really interesting. When you add 4 to it, she's got 18. There's no other ship since World War II. If you rate it according to battle stars, which, you know, that's not probably the most accurate way, but by that test, Orlick is the most decorated warship in American history since World War II. Now, there are people that would contest that for, in other ways. It's just like determining what the unemployment rate is today. They do it a lot of different ways. But one thing that we realized from that is that here we got a ship that's sitting down in Lake Charles, tied up to a river, and nobody's really recognizing it down there. We can't blame what's going on there for the 10 years, that the locust ate back when she first came home. But here we are. We got this wonderful look. I mean, that's why I wanted to ask earlier the numbers of people that were from Vietnam. Put your hands up again. This is kind of your time for making a difference for the USS Orlick, because, she came back. She kind of got the same kind of reception you got when she came back. She wasn't really well received as she kind of came back. But you know what? Things are kind of changing. And the fact that she is now being recognized, I went down and talked to the mayor in Lake Charles, and he never sported the ship before. But when he started thinking, I think, and he called me aside. And he said, "What can we do?" And we said, just good words. That's what we need from you. And so the next day, I get a call and went to his communications director's office, and we helped draft up a resolution that the mayor supported, was sent to the state of Louisiana legislature, and with a matter of a couple of weeks, USS Orlick has now become the official Vietnam War Memorial Museum for Louisiana. It's getting her on the map, and the Vietnam guys are the ones that really need to get behind her and really support her. And if she gets a permanent mooring, if the city down there recognizes how great she is, and what advantage she can bring to the city, with the fact that she's the most decorated ship. We saw the greatness of this ship. It led to the greatness of this organization. And I think that there's still a chance for her future ahead. And I think that what's really important, and we did get invited over to Turkey, and I did get to go aboard the ship on the very last day of her active service. And I think I'm probably shared this before. I'm not sure I did, but we have a couple extra minutes. We're really ahead of time. You guys really did a good job, 3 to 5 minutes. We didn't need to use a flashlight ever, Had somebody with a big flashlight, they were ready to shine it on you. When I went aboard the ship the first time, she was absolutely gorgeous. I mean, she was lined up with all these other ships. And I was just absolutely amazed. They piped me aboard. I went aboard, and when nobody was looking, I touched the ship, and I felt an electricity that was just unbelievable. So I know that the part of that ship does have the men who served upon that, because it became very clear to me. Went down to the stateroom of the captain, and we were treated so graciously, and that's where the model of the ship, which you're going to see this reunion in a very, very honored place. And we were really, really impressed by that. And then I saw what happened when the decommissioning occurred there. The crew ran off the ship, and 2 or 3 of the crew stayed, and they painted out her numbers and her name, because they didn't want her to be disgraced by any rust that people might see as she sat. They loved the ship. I see that you love the ship. She is the reason we are here. One of the things that happened also with the connections that we had with the Turkish Navy, we got to know the men who served her over there. They're the same kind of high-quality sailors as we had. As a matter of fact, the United States Navy, the Turkish Navy, were just like that. And they were just like that with the Israeli Navy. They're very, very, very close, strong allies. And you remember last year I talked to you about the arrest of our friend who helped us get the ship back, Commander Jim Gurdinus. He was arrested as a result of a desire by the Islamists to the Prime Minister Erdogan, who was the prime minister, who didn't have a lot of power, but as the economy increased over there, he started becoming more popular, by an Islamist, an imam, who has been given refuge in the United States and lives in Pennsylvania, and is probably the most powerful Islamist in the world, controls schools in 130 countries, and controls the prosecutors and the police in Turkey. They conspired to have arrested over half of the officers in the Turkish military. Half of the admirals were arrested and put in jail, including John Gurdness. Well, thank goodness there is some fairness and justice over there, because the High Court has just released them all. They found them, you know, that they were wrong, that the evidence was, in fact, altered and was fabricated, and these men are now out. However, you know, we know Turkey is now, because of that, has moved to the Iran and Syria type of thing. They're no longer allies of Israel or really of the United States. So, but the reason I'm bringing this to the end here, and we're gonna do one last thing here before we go. I got a letter just today. It came in my email, and I wanted to read you because I think it's really a good recap of what we feel and what the Turks felt of the Orlick. It comes from Admiral Gurdness. He said, "Dear Bob, sorry for being late to answer your mail since I was sick in the last 2 days. I'm glad that you are together again with Orlick family. Here is a short message to your association. Ships are born with different destinies. Some are lucky, some are not. USS Orlick was born with luck. Not only she lived a successful active duty in both us and Turkish navies, but she also had such a wonderful crew which immortalized her name and identity. Of hundreds of destroyers were built and served over the oceans throughout the ages, but few were saved from the concrete facts of being scrapped or becoming a live target ship. USS Orlick has survived both. She survived also a huge hurricane in Texas. This is La Forza del Destino, the force of her destiny. But do not forget, without your love and devotion to this ship, destiny would not have shaped as such, so keep loving her. All the best, Admiral John Gurdness." That concludes this program. I hope we have put something on record here that will really, you know, be able to be shown to people, to tell them the story of what USS Orlick is about.